وصلى اللهم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. As for proceeded, indeed the best of speech and the most truthful of speech is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the best of guidance is the guidance of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, and the worst of affairs are the newly introduced matters, and each and every single newly introduced matter is a bid'ah, it is an innovation, and each and every single innovation is a misguidance, and all the misguidances are in the hellfire. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to safeguard myself and yourself from the nar. Amin ya Rabb. Well, alhamdulillah, we've gathered once again to discuss and study the fiqh of Sawm, the fiqh of fasting, from the treatise and the matan Manhaju Salikin, the Wayfarer of the Travellers, authored by Shaykh Abdul Rahman ibn Nasir as-Sa'di, rahimahullah ta'ala. And last week we discussed Ahlul A'dhari. We discussed the people who are exempted from fasting, and this evening we will add to that list bi'idhnillah. So last week we discussed the rulings regarding the Musafir and the Marid, the person who undertakes a travel and the person who is ill. And we mentioned the different circumstances that they find themselves in and the related ruling. We also mentioned the rulings relating to the breastfeeding women and the pregnant women and the different rulings which relate to them. Naam. And then the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, said, وَالْعَاجِزْ عَنِ الصَّوْمِ لِكِبَرٍ وَالْعَاجِزْ عَنِ الصَّوْمِ لِكِبَرٍ, that the one who is incapable of fasting. And those who are incapable of fasting is one of two types. Firstly, the person who is incapable, but his incapability doesn't go away. And this is due to kibar. What does this mean? It relates to a person who is old in age. So we mentioned in the first class that the conditions which make fasting binding upon a person is that they must be qadir, they must be able, they must be physically able to fast. So the elderly is the one who is exempted from fasting, and this is the first type of person who is incapable. The second type of person who is incapable is a person who is ill, but it is expected of him to recover. So whilst he is ill, whilst he is sick, the marid, and is expected to recover, he can break his fast and not fast those days. However, after Ramadan is completed, what must happen? He must make up those days. فَإِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. So the ajiz, the one who is incapable of fasting, we mentioned, it is due to kibar. And kibar is old age. Taib. And the scholars have divided those who are elderly into two categories. A person who is old, but he still has his sanity with him. A person who is old, but he still has his sanity with him. What is the ruling on this individual? Is that if fasting is detrimental to him, then he should not be fasting. The second type of person who is elderly is the person who is basically mufnid, person who suffers from dementia, Alzheimer's. These people, these individuals, what ruling do they take? Rufi al-qalam. The pen is lifted from these individuals, right? They are not morally responsible for their actions. So with regards to the elderly, those who are not expected to get better, the older they get, the weaker they become, what must they do? Shaykh Abdul Rahman says, فَإِنَّهُ يُطْعِمْ عَنْ كُلِّ يَوْمٍ مِسْكِينًا, that this individual will feed a poor person for every day which is missed. The elderly. Those who are unable to fast. And this usually goes back to the individual, but sometimes the individual is so stubborn they still continue to fast, despite the fact they've been advised you should not be fasting. So matters which the ulama mention like this, it goes back to Ahlul Tajrubah, the people who have insight and knowledge. And who would this be? A doctor. So there's lots of masail in our sharia which go back to a doctor, meaning that he will guide you with regards to this. The concession is there that these people do not have to fast, and They can feed a poor person for every day, but the one who really qualifies this concession will be a doctor. Because sometimes a person feels he's 65, right? He says, I'm old, I'm not going to fast anymore. However, if he is able-bodied and fasting does not harm him, then fasting is still a wajib upon him. But if fasting is detrimental to him, then he takes the concession of feeding a poor person for every day. And this, we mentioned, it is known by the people of knowledge in this regard. Taib. So he says, فَإِنَّهُ, then he feeds a poor person for every day. And this is the individual who we said is not expected to recover. If you're not expected to recover from an illness, then you can feed a poor person for every day which was missed. And that's the first category of person who is incapable. The second category is, we said, it is a person who is ill, but is expected to recover. So what if a person misses out 15 days of Ramadan, 20 days of Ramadan? What's upon this person if it is expected that he's going to recover? Last year, Uncle Munir was in the hospital, right? In Ramadan, mashallah. And our colleague also was opposite you, Barakallahu Fiqh. So the person who's expected to recover, what must he do? What's the asl? What's the foundational ruling? La. He's expected to recover. He must make up the day. Right? He should make up the day. فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. طيب. So the ajit feeds a poor person for every day. And this is based upon the evidence in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 184, where Allah Azza wa Jalla said, وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ. That upon those who is able to fast, upon them is to pay the fidya of feeding a poor person. So this verse, it was in relation to fasting in the early advent of Al-Islam. What does this mean? In the early advent of Al-Islam, Islam gave you, Allah Azza wa Jalla gave you the choice between fasting or feeding a poor person. But thereafter this rule was abrogated and fasting became wajib upon those who were able to, but this ruling remained. And what proves this ruling remained, meaning the person who is incapable, he can feed a poor person, is the statement of Ibn Abbas, which is found in Bukhari, wherein he said, Laysat bimansukhatin. And this shows you the knowledge of nasikh and mansukh. What is nasikh and mansukh? That which abrogates and the verses which is abrogated. So no person can go to the Quran and read the Quran and then say, oh, we apply this rule, we don't apply that rule. Rather, you have to have knowledge of this. And the person who has knowledge of this is the faqih and the mujtahid imam, the one who can exert himself to come to legal conclusions. For many times people read verses on face value and then try to get the understanding of its implementation. We have to refer back to the scholars for the understanding of the verses. So he said, Laysat bimansukhatin, that this verse, it is not abrogated, wa huwa shaykhul kabir wal mar'atul kabira. He said it relates to the shaykhul kabir. We said, who is the shaykhul kabir? Old man, and the mar'atul kabira, the old lady. لا يستطيعان أن يصوما فيطعمان مكان كل يوم مسكينا. They are unable to fast, so they feed a poor person for every day which was missed. For every day which was missed. So the marid, the ill person, also takes the ruling of the ajiz, but he doesn't get the concession of feeding a poor person. He must make up the day. So we get lots of questions in this regard, with regards to the fidya and feeding a poor person. And is it permissible to feed a poor person with example, a meal you buy, for example, a chipral? Can you feed the person a chipral, right? So the asl is that the person should be fed with that which is considered to be a staple in your country. And what's the price of the fidya? What was it last year? 30, in excess of 30 rand, right? So how do they come to this conclusion? it's based upon a measurement which the Prophet also gave, which is the sa or the mud. Taib. So the Prophet also said that the fidya for the people of Medina and Makkah would be dates, barley, wheat, etc. So the fidya must be given in the staple of the people of your country. So what is staple for us? Rice, lentils, bread, dal, etc. And usually people give their money to organizations and they depute them to oversee this, and then they feed the poor people. So what they possibly do is they cook a pot of food and maybe they have some lillah and they add meat to it and they give that as a meal. Taib. So for every day which is missed, the person must feed a poor person. And the practice of Anas ibn Malik, when he was elderly, was that he would delay the fidya, and at the end of Ramadan, he would make a pot of food. The right pot of food contains rice. If it's akli, it can contain biryani, it can contain lentils. So that is staple. People add meat to it, and you can feed people from that food. But it must go to the miskin. Okay? And the miskin is the one who is considered to be poor. Okay? There's two types of poor people in Islam. Faqir and the miskin. Right? The faqir is the one who is indigent. He has nothing. Right? He has nothing. He doesn't have a house, doesn't have a car, doesn't have a job, has no provisions. That's the faqir. Right? So he is in a more dire need. And the miskin is the one who possibly he can have a job, can have a roof over his head. Okay? He can have money, but his money doesn't suffice him. So they can also be fed with regards to the fidya, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. So the author then said, وَمَنْ أَفْطَرَ فَعَلَيْهِ الْقَضَى فَقَطْ, that whomsoever breaks his fast in the month of Ramadan, فَعَلَيْهِ الْقَضَى فَقَطْ, then upon him is only to make qada. And he mentions إِذَا كَانَ فِطْرُهُ بِأَكْلٍ أَوْ شُرْبٍ, and this is in the case when he broke his fast due to eating or drinking. Okay? So who breaks their fast with regards to eating and drinking? Hey? This is any person, right? The traveler, the sick person, those who are weak in iman and break their fast, a'udhu billah, upon them is to make qada only. Taib? And that's based upon the verse. And we like to link the student to the evidences. So what is the evidence for the person who must make up mistakes? Uncle Ismail will know it. فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. That person must make up the day. Right? And they say مُتَوَالِيًا أَوْ مُتَفَرِّقًا. So the person can either do it consecutively outside of the month of Ramadan, or he can break the days up. But the usual case is that the people delay it. Right? The women mostly delay it up until Sha'ban, and then the time becomes restricted. Na'am. So with regards to this matter is bara'atu dhimma, meaning you must make yourself free from that debts. And these debts which remains upon us, it is debts which belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes we owe people money, and that causes us to become shy. We don't want to show our face in public. We avoid the people. Na'am. And this is in relation to Adamiyin, in relation to human beings. But the debts which belong to Allah Azza wa Jal, ahaqqu ayyuqda. It is more becoming that we fulfill it. So it's best to do it immediately, but the person is given then 11 months to fulfill this wajib. So it's a long time. And they can either do it, we said, consecutively, or they can break up the days. And what proves this is the ayah did not mention a specific days that they must make it up. Allah Azza wa Jalla said, فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. Make it up from days outside of Ramadan. And so, there's no specific time for making it up, but it must be made up before the next Ramadan. And then he says, إِذَا كَانَ فِطْرُهُ بِأَحَدِ الْمُفْتِرَاتِ. And this is in the event when the person broke their fast due to one of the nullifiers of fasting. And we'll get to the nullifiers of fasting. Well, what nullifies the fast, which we know of? Eating and drinking. Intercourse. Right? So he's only mentioning here due to eating and drinking. Okay? Because intercourse, there's a kafara. There's an expiation. There's a certain method the Muslim must follow with regards to the expiation. And we'll get to that. So, eating and drinking, the proof for this is the verse where Allah said, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 187, وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ ثُمَّ أَتِمُّوا الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ. Allah said, eat and drink up until the white thread becomes manifest from the black thread. And then complete your fasting up until night time. So this is a dalil to prove that eating and drinking is a nullifier of fast. Also the hadith of Abu Hurairah, the hadith al-Qudsi, wherein the Prophet said, يَقُولُ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ, Allah Azza wa Jal says, أَصَوْمُ لِي وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ يَدَعُ شَهْوَتَهُ وَأَكْلَهُ وَشُرْبَهُ مِنْ أَجَلِهِ. Na'am, that fasting is done for my sake, and I will reward for it. The fasting person, he leaves off his shahwa. What is shahwa? Desire. Right, so this proves also that intercourse breaks the fast. Wa aklahu, and he leaves off his eating, and he leaves off his drinking for my sake. Another narration, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, As-sawmu li wa ana ajzi bihi. That fasting is done for my sake, and I will reward for it. And this is from amongst the many virtues of fasting, is that fasting does not have a specific reward attached to it. Every deed we do in Islam, you can get 10 up to 700 rewards for that one deed. So Allah Azza wa Jalla starts us off on 10 rewards. Taib. And that can be multiplied to 700. So what does the reward go back to? Goes back to one's sincerity and how well they fulfill this act of worship. If they fulfill this act of worship, as was done by the Prophet upon the Sunnah, this will determine the level of reward. So from 10 up until 700, Allah Azza wa Jal rewards us for a single deed. But the scholars say with regards to fasting, there is no specific reward. Because in the hadith, the Prophet said that Allah Azza wa Jal said, As-sawmu li wa ana ajzi bi. Fasting is done for my sake, so I will reward for it. Because fasting is that one ibadah that only Allah Azza wa Jal truly knows you are engaging in it. Naam, the youngsters sometimes can deceive us. And I see many of the younger elders is laughing, right? So you can break your fast, naam, and then you sit at the iftar table and you can go for it. Say, I fasted, it's difficult today. Drink a liter of water, But the person perhaps did not fast, but Allah Azza wa Jal truly knows. So since this is an action which is done solely for Allah, the person who does it will only do it for the sake of Allah. Because he is aware of Allah Azza wa Jal. He is conscious of the fact that Allah Azza wa Jal sees all of his actions and his deeds. And so even if he is secluded, he is mindful of Allah. So for this reason, there's no limit for the reward for fasting. So sawmu li wa ana ajzi bihi. So this evidence, as we mentioned, proves the fact that eating and drinking nullifies the fast. It nullifies the fast. And then the author said, Awkay'a amdan. Right? Or the person, he vomited, but he did so purposefully. Okay? That is also a nullifier of the fast. But connected to the things we mentioned previously, is eating and drinking. Does this only relate to physically eating, or are there other things that also nullify the fast? Sorry? Aywa. So, with regards to any type of medication which is considered to be nutritional, type of a person, for example, is ill, they can't eat, they get a drip. That drip is nutritional. That drip will break the fast. Person gets vitamin C shot. That will be considered to be nutritional. It will break the fast. So the debate between this is whether it is nutritional or not. If the medication which is taken is considered to be nutritional, especially by way of injection, then that will be a nullifier of fast. If it is not, then the scholars differ on this, but they say if it is not nutritional, it doesn't break the fast. So the author then mentioned the third nullifier of fast, right? The person who vomits with intent and purposefully. And this might seem far-fetched, but when we taught these masail to youngsters, I actually learned that they said some mornings if they're sick, try to bamboozle the parents, what do? They go to the bathroom and they cause themselves to vomit. So what happens now? I'm feeling sick, mommy. I'm not going to go to school today. Okay, my boy, rest today. Right? So this is the thing. So if they did this in the month of Ramadan, then this is going to be a nullifier of fast. Why? Based upon the hadith reported in Ahmad that the Prophet said, من ذرعه القيء فليس عليه قضاء ومن استقاء عمدا فليقضي. The Prophet said that whomsoever is overcome and he vomits due to this, فليس عليه قضاء. He mustn't pay in any day. وَمَنِ اسْتَقَاءَ عَمْدًا فَلْيَقْضِي. And whomsoever causes himself to vomit purposefully, then he must make up the day. He must make up the day. So as for in the event where the person is overcome by it, he can't control it, this doesn't nullify the fast. But if the person purposefully vomits, then this will be a nullifier of fast. And the scholars give some examples of this. They say, for example, if a person knows that there's a certain sight that causes him to become nauseous, he shouldn't look at it. Or if there's a certain smell which he knows causes him to vomit, he shouldn't smell it, and so on and so forth. So that all comes under purposefully vomiting. But as for the one who unintentionally does it, then there's no qada upon this person. The author then said, "Oh hijama." Oh hijama. What is hijama? Cupping, right? Cupping. So hijama also breaks the fast. So why would it break the fast? There must be an explicit evidence from the Prophet ﷺ, right? Because there's no way the aql can say that this falls under eating and drinking. So the Prophet ﷺ said, "Aftar al-hajim wal-mahjum." The Prophet ﷺ said that the hajim, the one who does the cupping, and the one who gets cupped, both of their fasts are broken. And this masala, it is specific with regards to the Hanabila. Only the Hanbalis have said that this is a nullifier of fast. Why? Because Imam Ahmad also narrates the hadith, right? Found of the Hanbali madhab is Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and the hadith is found in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. So there's another hadith, right? So the Hanbalis say that if the person gets cupped, their fasting is broken. And what's the illa behind this? What's the reasoning behind this? They say because if the person gets cupped, right, what happens? He becomes weak, right? He becomes weak, and he might put his fasting in jeopardy, right? Perhaps the person can faint. As the person faints, the pen is lifted, and that will also cause the fast to be broken. So for this reason, they say the hadith of the hajib applies. However, there's another hadith, right, which is reported in Bukhari on the authority of Ibn Abbas, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم احتجم وهو صائم واحتجم أو أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم احتجم وهو محرم وَاحْتَجِمَ وَهُوَ صَائِم. That the Prophet ﷺ got capped whilst he was in a state of ihram. طيب, that's one ruling. وَاحْتَجِمَ وَهُوَ صَائِم. And he also had himself capped whilst he was fasting. So now there's another hadith with regard to this chapter, right, of the fact this nullifies the fast. So as a jurist, as a faqih, what must you do? Jam. Right? What does that mean? You must reconcile. You must look at all the evidences. You must try to reconcile between these two narrations. Right? So the scholars say that the least ruling is, and this is the opinion of majority of the scholars, is that it is makruh to get yourself capped in Ramadan because of this hadith. Because how could the Prophet ﷺ have gotten himself capped, hijama done to him, whilst he was fasting, if it is a nullifier of fast? But the other hadith says, yani, that the fasting of the one who does the cupping and the cupper is nullified. So it must be then considered to be something which is makruh. Something which is makruh, because the person puts his fasting into jeopardy by way of this. And the cupper, why the cupper? Because the Prophet said that. But the illah, the reasoning behind it is, they mentioned that in the time of the Prophet they used to do the cupping and they would use an instrument to suck out the blood, type, to basically cause suction. And if this happened, then it's possible the person could have swallowed the blood and that would nullify the fast. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Yes. Was that in Ramadan? I'm not too sure the context of the hadith. Oh, was it whether the Prophet was in Ramadan? So it would have nullified the fast. Allahu A'lam. Okay, Allahu A'lam. I'm not too sure of the context of the hadith, but it does mention that the Prophet also got capped whilst he was in the state of ihram, and he got capped whilst he was fasting. Type. Allahu A'lam. Type. So the author then mentions the next nullifier of fasting, أو إمناء بمباشرة. Right, and this is an important matter to clarify. That which nullifies the fast, it is also intercourse, right? Or doing foreplay, right? And that causes the person to ejaculate. This will be a nullifier of fast. And the proof for this is the hadith we mentioned previously, where Allah Azza wa Jalla said, "As-sawmu li," and the person yada'u shahwatahu wa aklahu wa shurbahu min ajli, that the person leaves off his vain desires and his food and his drink for my sake. Taib. So this proves that this is a nullifier of fasting. Now the issue comes up with regards to kissing and touching and the likes of this. Should this also be avoided? Preferably? Say preferably? Depending on the stamina. Depending on your ability to refrain, right? And say your threshold, right? Say your threshold, right? If you light on juice and you kiss your wife, but that causes the person to ejaculate, right? Then that should be avoided. And this masala becomes alive, especially for those who are newlyweds. And that's why the scholars always advise not to get married before Ramadan, right? Because that's the honeymoon phase. So, if the person enjoys his wife and vice versa, and they do foreplay, and this causes the person to ejaculate, even if he did not penetrate his wife, then this is a nullifier of the fast, right? However, it is permissible for the person to fondle his wife and to kiss and the likes, okay? Because Sayyidina Aisha said, كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقبل ويباشر وهو صائم, that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم used to kiss and he used to do foreplay whilst he was fasting. But she did say, وَكَانَ أَمْلَكَكُمْ لِأَرْبِهِ, that he had the most control over his desire, right? He had the most control over his desire, alayhi salatu wassalam. So whoever has the ability to control himself and to control his desire, and if he simply enjoys his wife and it doesn't lead him to intercourse, then it is permissible. It is permissible. However, the person who is unable to withhold himself, and the scholars say it is haram upon this person to even have foreplay with his wife. Why? They say saddan li dhari'ah. And this basically is blocking off the means to something haram. So in essence it is not haram, but it can be a cause for this person who is weak in the sense that he can't control himself. It will become haram upon him. Because they say, فَمَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبِ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ وَاجِبٌ. That which the wajib is not perfected by also becomes a wajib. Right? And there's lots of rulings in Islam which is based upon this, blocking off the means to haram. So in essence this is not haram, but they block off the means because it can lead to something haram, and this is something which is consistent in the Hanbali madhab. So that which does nullify the fast is mubasharatul mar'a bil farj, is that if the person penetrates his wife, even if he does not ejaculate, by simply penetrating the wife, and this also is the reason for ghusl, which we mentioned previously, is that when the tip of the penis enters the vagina, then this is a reason for mujibatul ghusl. Ghusl becomes wajib even if the person did not ejaculate. So likewise also in this instance, in the instance of fasting, it takes the same ruling. So what's the proof for this? The verse where Allah Azza wa Jal said, أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنْ. Allah said, عَلِمَ اللَّهُ أَنَّكُمْ كُنْتُمْ تَخْتَانُونَ أَنفُسَكُمْ فَتَابَ عَلَيْكُمْ وَأَفَا عَنْكُمْ فَالْآنَ بَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ إِلَى آخِرِ الْآيَةِ. So Allah said, it is permitted for you in the nights of fasting, ar-rafath, to have intercourse with your wives. Hunna libasun lakum wa antum libasun lahun. You are a raiment, a garment for them, like they are a garment for you. Then Allah says, Alim Allahu annakum kuntum takhtanuna anfusakum fataba alaykum wa afa ankum. And Allah Azza wa Jal said that Allah Azza wa Jal knew that you deceived yourselves, fataba alaykum. So Allah Azza wa Jal accepted your repentance, wa afa ankum, and He pardoned you. So what's the context of this verse? In the early advent, of Islam, once a person broke his fast and he went to bed, then the rulings of fast would apply to him when he woke up. Meaning, he could not eat, and he could not drink, and he could not enjoy the company of his wife. However, certain Sahaba still did it, right? They still had intercourse with their wives. So what are we saying? You break your fast, you go to bed, you wake up, the ruling of fasting applies to you. This was in the early advent of Islam. Then Allah Azza wa Jal said that Allah Azza wa Jal knew that you are deceiving yourselves because they enjoyed the company of their wives after it was not permitted for them, right? And then Allah Azza wa Jal lifted this ruling, right? Then Allah said, فَالْآنَ بَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ. Then Allah said, now, بَاشِرُوهُنَّ, enjoy their company, have intercourse with them, and seek out what Allah Azza wa Jal has written for you, and eat and drink up until the white thread becomes clear from the black thread, which is subuh as-sadiq, true dawn. True dawn. So Allah Azza wa Jal then permitted eating and drinking and intercourse in the nights of Ramadan. But in the early time, Allah Azza wa Jal prohibited after the person broke his fast and he went to bed. And so this proves once again that intercourse with one's wife, even if they did not ejaculate, it breaks the fast. So with regards to intercourse, we mentioned that all other types of misfast, what is upon the person? The ajiz, the one who is incapable and doesn't recover, they must simply give fidya. But all other individuals who break their fast in the days of Ramadan, what must they do? They must make up that day. With exception also to the pregnant female who fears for her child. They must also give fidya, right? So with regards to the kafar or the expiation, and we've heard this before, that when we were young and they say, if you miss out a day of fasting, you must fast for 60 days consecutively, right? So this is in relation to the person who had intercourse in the day of Ramadan with his spouse. There is a kafara. For in the hadith of Abu Hurairah, which is found in Bukhari, that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, halaktu. What did he say? He said, I am destroyed. فَقَالَ وَمَا ذَاكَ. The Prophet ﷺ said, and for what reason? He said, وَقَعْتُ بِأَهْلِ فِي رَمَضَانِ. He said that I had intercourse with my spouse in the day of Ramadan. The Prophet ﷺ said, هَلْ تَجِدُ رَقْبَةً. Do you find a slave? قَالَ لَا. He said, no. قَالَ فَهَلْ تَسْتَطِيعُ أَن تَصُومَ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ. Are you able to fast 2 consecutive months? And the person said, لا. The Prophet then asked him, فَتَسْتَطِيعُ أَن تُطْعِمْ سِتِّينَ مِسْكِينًا. Are you able to feed 60 poor people? And the person said, لا. And so a man from the Ansar came, بِأَرَقٍ فِيهِ تَمْرٍ. And he came with a branch, and on this branch there was dates. The Prophet then told this person, اذهب بهذا فتصدق به. Go with this and give charity with this to the poor. The person then said, there's no one more in need than me, O Messenger of Allah. And by the one who has sent you with the truth, there is no one in between these 2 lava plains, these 2 mountains, the Ayr and the Thawr, who is in more dire need than my family. And so the Prophet then said, اذهب فأطعموا أهلك. Go and feed your family with this. Right? So there's many benefits from this hadith, but the main benefit which we take is that there is a penalty, and the penalty is an expiation for the person who has intercourse in Ramadan, in the day of Ramadan. So what is upon this person? Firstly, tahriru raqabah. They must free a slave. Slavery is abolished, right? Slavery is abolished, so there's no more slaves. And a point also, when a hadith like this come up, people attack Islam and they say, you see, Islam advocates slavery. But Islam never instituted slavery, it inherited slavery. And then it gave rules which govern the slaves. Right? And it was very just. Feed them from your food and clothe them with your clothing. And Islam also gave high rewards for those who manumit slaves. Type like this example over here. So Islam never instituted slavery, but it inherited the problem of slavery. So slavery has been abolished. So automatically we go to the next ruling, which is fasting for 60 days. That's the ruling. And the scholars say that these days must be mutawaliyan. It must be consecutive. Right? 60 days consecutive. So we learn the ruling now, so we never fall into the action. And they say it must be consecutive, and the only time you're excused is, for example, in the instances where the people are granted concession, like travel or illness, and the days of Eid, not permissible to fast. So those days are like breaks. Type. And if the person is unable to do this, then they must feed 60 poor people. 60 poor people. And the scholars say that this is only in relation to fasting in the month of Ramadan. Okay, we can't make an analogy upon this and apply it to other types of fasting. So for example, if a person had an obligatory fast outside of Ramadan, like, what are other forms of obligatory fast? Qada is wajib. What else? Nadhr, taking a vow to fast. So if Allah Azza wa Jal blesses me with this, I'm going to fast 3 days this month. With me? That will be a fast which is wajib. But now what if that person fell into intercourse with his wife? Does this rule also apply to them? He said no, because this is only for Only for Ramadan, right? Only for Ramadan. And the scholars say that you will look at يعني the person's ability. So you're not mukhayyar, you don't have a choice. If you have the ability to fast, you must fast. Okay? You can't be like, you have a choice. Fasting is difficult for me, then I'm gonna feed 60 poor people. You must go in sequence, and if you have the qudra, the ability, you must fulfill that expiation. Right? And the scholars also mention that if the person has intercourse with his wife in Ramadan, then that is the expiation, but they must still make qada for that day. You with me? So they must still make up that day as a misfast plus the expiation, right? Plus the expiation. So the author then said, إِلَّا مَنْ أَفْتَرَ بِجِمَاءٍ فَإِنَّهُ يَقْضِي. Right? فَإِنَّهُ يَقْضِي. The author then said, Rahimahullah Ta'ala, he basically mentioned what we just clarified now. وَيَأْتِكُ رَقْبَةً. He frees the slave. فَإِن لَمْ يَجِدْ فَصِيَامُ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ. He fasts 2 consecutive months. فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَإِطْعَامُ 60 miskina. He feeds 60 poor people. Right? He feeds 60 poor people. The author then mentioned, Rahimahullah Ta'ala, قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من نسي وهو صائم فأكل أو شرب فليتم صومه فإنما أطعمه الله وسقاه متفق عليه. He then mentions a rule with regards to fasting, and that is the Prophet ﷺ said that whomsoever forgets whilst they are fasting and they eat and they drink, فَلْيُتِمَّ صَوْمَهُ, he must complete his fasting, for it is only Allah Azza wa Jal who gave him food and who gave him drink. So what does this mean? It means nisyan, if a person does something forgetfully, generally speaking in the Sharia, then they're not considered to be responsible for that. Right? They're not responsible for that. So if a person forgot he was fasting, and he went to the fridge, and he drank his full, and his wife caught him and said, "What are you doing?" SubhanAllah, it's actually Ramadan, right? What must a person do? Continue fasting. You must stop drinking, right? He can't quench his thirst, right? Likewise, a person is leftover cookies, right? And the cookies only come in Ramadan in Cape Town, right? The person takes a bite of the samosa. I go, liquor. And the child says, "Daddy, what you doing?" I forgot, right? But the person can't complete what they are eating, they must spit it out also. Okay? And hadith is agreed upon, as the Prophet said, that whosoever forgets whilst they are fasting and they eat or they drink, they must complete their fasting, for it is only Allah Azza wa Jalla who gave them something to eat and something to drink. Something to eat and something to drink. So the author then gets into some of the etiquettes of fasting, and that we're going to leave inshallah for our last lesson. But I want to mention one fa'idah inshallah with regards to all of the individuals who are exempted from fasting. So we mentioned all of the categories already now. So who are they? Last week we started, so the marid, the ill person, the traveler, haram, old people, who else? Sorry? The young. Mentally challenged. Okay, that comes under like haram, incapability, old age or sickness. Okay. Also the hamil, the lady who's pregnant. But we said it's best she consults with the doctor. Can you fast? Can't you fast? Right? And then also the murdi, the lady who breastfeeds. Who else? The scholars also mention ikrah. What is ikrah? Coercion. And many years ago we heard of like in places where the Muslims are oppressed, and perhaps it even happens in prisons, where Muslims are imprisoned, that they will be force-fed. So that is ikrah. And you are coerced, that is beyond your capability, you are not harmed by that. Right? Likewise, we heard also of the Uyghur Muslims in China who are being force-fed. So what is ikrah? Ikrah is like, if you don't drink, I'm going to kill your wife. So what you can do now? I'm fasting. Allah commanded me to fast. Also showed you need fiqh, right? So, the person must drink because he is coerced. Likewise, the scholars add another category. Of course, also the menstruating females, right? And ladies who suffer from nifas, postnatal bleeding, they can't fast. And they add another category is al-atushu shadid wal-jaw'u shadid. Extreme thirst and extreme hunger. Okay? Extreme thirst and extreme hunger. So what is extreme thirst? Maybe a person is in a place where there's no water, right? So he fasts and he breaks his fast. But now comes to the second or the third day, the person is going to suffer from dehydration. Then they can also break their fast in that instance, right? Likewise with extreme hunger, person who finds nothing, but they fast. And this question is posed sometimes to scholars. They say, Ya Fadilat al-Shaykh, we find nothing to break our fast with. No water and no drink. What should we do? And besides this, they ask if their fasting is accepted. Subhanallah. But they say, what should we do? The scholars say in this instance, the person must intend that his fast is broken. Likewise, for example, you're on the road and we know the hadith that we'll discuss next week, that the Prophet also said that the people will not cease to be upon goodness as long as they hasten to break the fast. But now you're on the road and you never took any provisions with you. You hear the adhan, see the sunset, no food with you. You must hasten to break the fast, number one. But in this instance, the scholars say you intend that fasting has ended. And by way of that, the fasting has then concluded. So, al-atushu shadid wal-jaw'u shadid, and these are all of the categories of people who are exempted from fasting, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. طيب نكتفي بهذا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى